everybody, and welcome back to Both Sides Book Club, where we are on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we are on episode number 5, where we talk about Below Deck by Sophie Hardcastle. I hope you all enjoyed this one.
Yeah, this was my pick. Sophie is a young Australian author, and this is her first novel for adults. She's previously written a memoir and a children's book, but this is her first foray into adult fiction. Why did I pick it? We've talked before about the impact of a first chapter on whether you're going to like a book, and this one absolutely socked it to me. I mean, it thumped me on my chin. My jaw dropped. I mean, how could you possibly not want to continue reading a book that the first chapter ends in "At sea, no one can hear you scream," and it was such an important book, I felt, and I thought that it was a story that we should talk about. So just to recap for any of you that haven't had the chance to read the book yet, the book is a story of Olivia, who is a young Australian woman in her early 20s. She's a little bit lonely and a little bit lost. And through the friendship of an older couple, Mac and his friend Maggie, she learns about a love of the sea and of sailing, and basically goes off adventuring and sailing all over the world. And then the story goes forward 4 years, and she's delivering a yacht with an all-male crew, and during that voyage she's sexually assaulted, and obviously it knocks the bottom out of her world. And so the book then explores the impact that this has on her and how she manages to find herself of sense again.
I think the cool thing about this book is it raises a lot of topics and a lot of issues. Yeah, it does. I mean, one of the other things that I absolutely loved about this book, and I didn't know until after I read it and started to do a little bit of reading around the book, was that Sophie Hardcastle, the author, wrote it while she was on a scholarship at Oxford University, and she actually wrote it as instead of a thesis, which I think was just absolutely extraordinary. And every week she would write, and then she would go to a tutorial with her professor. And who
she
happened
would
to be a Man Booker Prize judge in the past.
Exactly.
Unbeknownst to her at the time, actually. Yeah.
And she would have to read what she'd written aloud to him. So for me, that was another big tick. And how brave, how brave and how confronting to have to do that.
I think the cool thing that I really enjoyed about this book is just the change in tone as well. And I think you can see that through the writing style, through different use of punctuation and just different writing techniques.
Yeah.
What did you think about the writing techniques in it?
I loved it. You can hear, once you know that Sophie read the book aloud,
you can feel that,
you can feel it. She plays around with her punctuation, with the way her sentences work, and I think it's incredibly successful at putting across the spoken word, particularly in conversations, and the way our own thoughts are dislocated and disjointed. So I really, really enjoyed it.
I think the thing that I really liked is how she plays around with the comma too.
Yeah.
Like you can see in certain sections where she's out of breath, you read it and you feel like you're breathless. You're breathless while you're reading it.
Yeah.
And actually, a side note, I think I would almost also like to listen to this as a audiobook now that I'm thinking about it. I mean, I read it as a hard copy, but as an audiobook I think it would add another layer to it.
Yes.
So when we did a little bit more research into this story, not only did we find out about her writing this book at university, but we also found that it's an incredibly personal book to Sophie Hardcastle, and some of the things that she talks about are really personal. Yeah.
So, so this episode is going to be a little bit different. In that Sophie has very, very kindly agreed to come on the show and talk with us. And we've prepared some topics and some questions that we'd like to discuss with her. But we hope very much that she will become part of our conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Because some of the things that we started to discuss and wanted to talk more about, we just thought, you know what, this is so personal.
We'd actually like to talk to Sophie about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a moment, we are going to have Sophie on the episode. Ah, it's working. Hi.
Hi. Welcome to Both Sides Book Club.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We're so excited to have you on this episode. I think particularly because there is such a personal element to this book, we just found it would be so much better having you and come and speak and hopefully join the conversation
Actually join the conversation with us.
Oh, awesome. So let's just dive straight in. Why not? So my first question for you is the obvious love of sea leaps out of every single page of Below the Deck. So can you tell us a little bit about where that comes from?
Yeah, so my parents actually were professional sailors. So they were doing yacht deliveries around the world for 10 years before they settled in Sydney to have my sister and I. And they continued to work on boats and on yachts kind of throughout my childhood. And then when I was 8, I got really into surfing, and by the time I was 12, I was surfing competitions kind of around Australia. And so my whole childhood and teenage years were very much in and around the sea.
Yeah.
And all my books, I think, have been very much like the sea almost becomes its own character, I think, in all of my books.
That's one of the things that I really enjoyed in your book, because I surf as well, and actually I grew up sailing a bit as well, and my partner sails and we do boat deliveries as well. So the thing that I loved about your novel is just the authenticity behind the ocean. I think a lot of people misconstrued how to explain the connection with the ocean, and when I was reading your book, I really felt like you had perfectly nailed the silence and the space and the flow that encompasses with your writing. Was that intentional in that way? Did you feel like your connection with the ocean informed that?
Yeah, definitely. I think my connection with the ocean has informed
everything
and anything that I've ever made. I also think that I feel like the ocean has almost been like a life force, or like a very much a presence in my life. But I think I've also been very fascinated for a long time about this sort of tension between the ocean being a space that liberates me, but also has the potential to kill me, or you know, to drown in water. And so I think that my relationship with it has always been sort of grappling that tension of, this is the place that I feel most at home, and it also is potentially a ferocious place that could, you know, be the end of you. It's like the beginning and the end of you.
Yeah, I feel like you particularly get that in surfing. Like, you know, you get all the joys of riding a wave, and you're having the adrenaline, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, you have a really big wipeout, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yes, that's right, the ocean is much bigger than me. It's like humbling.
I know, it is. It's very humbling. I mean, just this body of water is, I think, a very humbling entity, in that it reminds you of your mortality all the time. And then is also the space where you find yourself and you feel connected to yourself.
Absolutely.
So what I wanted to ask you about is that Below Deck, you know, is such a coming of age story. I mean, we see Ollie, you know, over a period of 8 or 9 years. How much of your own experience shaped the character of Ollie?
I definitely struggle, and maybe struggle is not the right word, but I have put, even in my fiction, have always put so much of my own lived experiences into it. I very much believe in writing what you know, not in that you have to experience, like, in a tangible, first-hand way everything that happens, but I do think that we write, like, kind of emotional experiences or feelings that happen to us, and for me it's really important to have my body acquainted with the landscapes that I want to write about.
Right.
So for this novel, to research it, I went to Antarctica as an artist in residence, and then I did 2 yacht deliveries up the east coast of Australia to the Coral Sea. Yeah. And very much learnt these places through my body. And I think, I mean, even the landscape in the UK, when Ollie's, you know, working in London, that is a place that, you know, has from living in the UK felt familiar and felt accessible. And so I do think that I bring not only my own experiences to my work, but also stories that we're constantly collecting from the people in our lives that then also filters through and inform characters and sort of inform plot lines.
Okay. And, you know, talking on that, the personal experiences, obviously there's synesthesia as an element of the novel, which I totally connected to, and in a way that I actually listened to, I did a bit of stalking on you, and I'm just going to be upfront about it. And I heard you speaking a little bit about it, how you hadn't really thought or like heard that maybe that was even a thing, or like the way that you see or hear in colour and whatever is beyond just you. But I kind of had a similar experience when I read it. Not that I hear colour, but I, from a young age, my memory's always been a photographic memory. Like if I haven't seen, like even with spelling words, if I haven't seen how something's pronounced, like visually, then
you have a very visual memory.
Yeah. And so part of that is also informed by colour, which I think's really, which I really connected to. Like at the beginning of each chapter, how it had a colour, I felt like I had visually seen what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sophie, I've heard you you saying at some point that you said to your mum, "Oh, that person is purple," trying to explain something. Well, but Catie used to do that, but not through sound. It was actually visually. I'd ask her about something when she was growing up, and she'd say, "But it's red, you know, the red one." I go, "What do you mean the red one?" And then I have to kind of tease out what you meant. So it's strange, isn't it, the way our senses
inform memories or whatever. But I'm interested to know.
Anyway,
why,
we're talking too much.
Yeah. Question for you, not for us. But I'm interested to know why you gave that to Ollie as well.
So when I did do the residency in Antarctica, when I came back, I was trying to make sense of my experiences there and trying to unpack and interrogate and understand them. And I was doing my visual arts degree, like my honours degree in visual arts at the time. And so for an entire year, I just made paintings of Antarctica and was trying to sort of like capture those experiences in paintings. And so my practice was very visual, and I ended up painting glaciers in the colours that I heard them carving. So glacial carving is when the sort of like front ice cliff of a glacier cracks off and ordinarily would fall into the sea, you know, if the glacier's coming down to the sea. And that is like a thunderous sound that I heard in pink and violet. And so I painted these pink glaciers for a year. And then when I went to Oxford the year after, in 2018, I kind of, having explored these experiences in paint and like in sort of visual practice, I fell quite naturally, I think, into then writing through the lens of my synesthesia. And it was easily the most natural way I've ever written, because it very much felt like an accurate representation of how I experience the world and how I see the world. And so it wasn't even until my professor sort of pulled me up on it when I was reading the text aloud to him and kind of pointed out that was quite an unusual way of seeing the world, that I really started thinking about actually placing Ollie in that and making her have synesthesia too.
But I think it's beautifully done because, you know, I guess every artist wants to be able to pull something out of somebody else, and like you've done that, because that's not something necessarily I would have been aware about before. I don't know if I have synesthesia, but I definitely have an awareness of color. So I think it's really awesome that you've done that and you've made it like relatable.
And it's so natural in the novel as well. You know, I mean, I really love the chapter headings that are either a reference to the sea, or a colour, or both. And it does just it colours the narrative, doesn't it? I mean, you can actually see it through that lens, and I think it frames it really incredibly well.
I think I was also interested in this, unfortunately, being quite a common story, in that I'm sure experiences of sexual violence don't feel unfamiliar to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I was interested in how can I tell this story that will resonate with a lot of people in a way that people potentially haven't heard before.
Yeah.
How can I show this same narrative from a different angle and sort of make it new or sort of reinvigorate this conversation.
That
actually leads us on to our next question.
So you know, I think one of the most striking points that you make in Below Deck is, you know, just dispelling that myth that sexual violence is something that happens, you know, down a dark alleyway by a stranger or by a psychopath. You know, that
or
it's
like
actually,
or even in like movies, how it's depicted, like soldiers and the victims or whatever.
Exactly. You know, is that the vast majority of sexual violence happens in a familiar environment. You know, with somebody that you know, and I think that, you know, that the novel does that really, really well. So, and then of course it brings up that whole area of consent. You know, if you participate, are you giving consent? When can you then say no? So, what was your? Can you talk to us a little bit about that and
why it's such a grey area?
Yeah, you feel it's such a grey area.
Yeah. So yeah, I was particularly interested in sort of expelling that myth, and I am like hesitant to call it a myth because I know that.
Well, it does happen.
Violence.
Yeah.
It does happen.
It does happen. Yeah.
The myth
Sadly.
is that story is not representative of most.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was interested in putting my character in a scene or in a space that like zooms in focus on that like intimate setting. In that on land, I think it's very easy to sweep these stories under the rug and to ignore them, as they so often unfortunately are. Whereas at sea, when you can't go anywhere and there's, you know, you're trapped, it's impossible not to face those myths head on. I wrote an essay about the fact that most instances of sexual violence do occur in intimate settings, and that we could say that this book perhaps drags up this myth from the deep and puts it on deck and lets it flounder, and like a fish that's unable to breathe like in daylight and in air, it like suffers and it dies, and we see it for exactly what it is, and we see it as a myth. I think I was very interested in in kind of writing something that would potentially be ambiguous, because I think, like, on one hand, we want to assume that these stories that are happening on the periphery with the stranger in the alleyway, sort of at the margins or in the edges of society, that those we can take as being my cat just fell off.
I said cat.
Hello, cat.
That we can take those, sorry to interrupt, but we can take those experiences as being incredibly clear cut, and that the sort of murky areas of consent, I think it's because we just don't see them represented. No. So it's not that if you say no and then you choose to participate, it's not that is ambiguous, it's that we haven't seen that before, perhaps in like mainstream media. And so I think the point that I was trying to make was that, Ollie initially says no, and she writes a sentence with her body, and then she has this person ignore the sentence and turn the page. And had that person stopped when she first said no, she would have had a kind of uncomfortable and not very pleasant kiss. Yes. And that would have been it.
Yeah.
And so anything that happens after that is she hasn't consented to. And I think she participates in it because that somehow makes the experience feel less traumatic. And I know from personal experience and from people in my life that has, been a very real thing to try and not downplay, but to try and cope with, with that trauma, is to feel like you have some kind of agency. But if something is happening to you, whether you like it or not, are you really making a choice? And that was the question that I really wanted to address or ask of my readers.
But I think it is such a grey area, and I just want to thank you for bringing that into your book, because I think, especially any younger adults or even, people finding themselves, I think it's your book has given, I think, the strength to kind of start to realise, no, you know what, like, I have a voice, I have a right, this should be respected.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings me, to the question, and obviously we have our opinions about it, but we'd like to hear yours. Like, so why doesn't Ollie scream? Why don't women when they find themselves in that situation,
or any victim,
well, exactly, it doesn't have to be a woman. Why don't we scream?
So I think there's like a few things in that. I mean, it's such a loaded question.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I just want.
Sorry, I don't mean you asking that. I mean, when Ollie is asked this in the book, it's like an incredibly loaded question that he puts on her. And I think it assumes that it is. It assumes a lot of things. I think if you are inches away from someone and you're saying no, what makes you think that screaming is going to make a difference? If they're not listening to you to begin with. And I think certainly in most instances, victims and survivors are in a position where they are being overpowered and they are feeling like they don't have control. And I think the fear that silences people is knowing or not knowing how far this person could take it. So if you were to scream, how do you know that that's not going to be the thing that sets this person off and potentially ends your life? And so that then silences her. And I think that fundamentally is the reason why she doesn't scream, is she has no idea how far this person would take it.
And I think that too is the miseducation and the misconception that it is a black and white thing, because it's really not. It is such a grey topic. So
I think the other, if I can quickly
add of course.
What was I going to say? The other thing about that question is that, Ollie knows this person, and I think perhaps when you know somebody, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt. No, they'll figure it out. They'll they'll understand, and you're conditioned to be thinking about how this screen will potentially affect their life and their job prospects. And if you name this, you know, she doesn't want to name it as sexual violence, she doesn't want to name it as rape, because we so often are made to think of how this will destroy that person and not to actually think about how it's destroying you.
And
your boundaries.
And I think you do set, you do second guess yourself, don't you, going, oh well, maybe I'm not making it clear enough. You know, you kind of almost blame, I would imagine you almost sort of blaming yourself, that kind of like guilt, or that, oh, I should have done that, or maybe it's partly my fault, which I think is something that commonly happens. Which obviously it's not, but I do think, you know, I don't know whether it is just as women that we take on that role. You know, I don't know.
How much of Ollie's lack of a sympathetic male role inform the decisions that she makes, and how does this change when she meets Mac and later Hugo?
Yeah, so I think I definitely wasn't trying to insinuate that that a lack of male or a lack of positive new role models is what, like, you know, causes her to make these decisions. And yet with her father and with her first boyfriend, they set such a low bar of what is acceptable. And so I think meeting Mac very early in the story shows her what it's like to, you know, even though it's platonic love, it shows her what it's like to have a love that fortifies and solidifies you and makes you stronger, rather than a love that sort of whittles you down and makes you weaker. I think I was also using Ollie's father and her first boyfriend to show how easily bodies can be exploited when someone or when another person feels entitled to them. That whether that body in this story is the ocean, a body of water, whether it's the like non-human spaces and non-human landscapes like a body of earth, or whether it's a human body, a lack of respect for and a sense of entitlement to allows or sort of permits the exploitation of that body. And so I think the men in the story that have a complete disregard for women and disrespect women in their bodies also think in very toxic ways about the natural world and feel a sense of entitlement to the world around them. I mean, the men that are sailing on the boat with Ollie from Noumea to Auckland are bludgeoning a fish, and they're dipping oil into the sea, and they're trying very much to control the weather and control the boat in a way that you just can't when you're sailing. Whereas Mac is on the other end of the spectrum. He has the utmost respect for the women in his life, and he understands that sailing is about surrendering and listening and not trying to control the weather and sort of appreciating the interconnectedness of all things.
And I think that kind of goes really to the next question, which is...
Can I actually interrupt?
You can. Sorry. You may. No, go for it.
Because the next question, there's two parts to your answer, which is like the body of like water and the earth, which I think I want to get to in a second.
Sure.
But I do want to go back to the relationship with Mac a little bit more. And I just want to, for me, that when Mac was introduced into the story, it was a very, I completely related to it because I actually had a Mac in my life with sailing, which for the first time in my learning how to sail, I had, an older guy, an older sailor, who's a very good friend, teach me the ropes how to sail and took me seriously, and got me to do loads of, all the grunt work and stuff, which was amazing. So I want to know, why was Maggie important in that as well? Was it to show an example of women feeling like empowered in that role or like appreciated in a different way? Yeah,
because I think what was so important about Mac was not just his he is as a person, but how he relates to other people, and how
Yeah.
his relationship with Maggie is then becomes kind of like a cornerstone, or sets such a high bar and a precedent for what is acceptable, and what Ollie should feel is acceptable.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
hoping you would say. That's what I felt, and I was like, I hope that's what you.
Yeah,
So anyway,
she was just gorgeous.
Yeah, she was gorgeous.
Yeah. So back to my question.
Sorry, I was
that sense of entitlement, and you were talking about respect for a body, and that kind of segues really neatly into the way in which you link the parallels between climate change and sexual violence that both come from. I mean, I'm assuming both what you're trying to say is that both do come from that entitlement and a lack of respect. Would you like to talk us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when you really distill it or sort of break it down, climate change is caused by, or like environmental exploitation is the direct result of a sense of entitlement to the earth, that we feel like we have privilege over it, that we feel like it is here as a resource for us, in a similar way to how sexual violence functions, where one person feels a sense of entitlement to another person. They feel they have privilege over them. They feel like they are more worthy of respect and therefore want to dominate this body and to control it. And so I think I was studying at Oxford 2 years ago, and I was looking at literature of the environment and looking at ecofeminism, which is kind of the intersection of feminism and environmentalism.
Right.
And I think any form of like systematic oppression in the sense of entitlement and privilege over another body, whether that is like in like queer bodies, a person of color, a woman's body, or the world at large, that oppression is facilitated by a sense of entitlement to that body.
Is that also why I know you had a personal experience in Antarctica, but from a climate change point of view, the part that really stood out in the novel to me was at the end where she can finally breathe again. And I'm curious to know, more than just because it's cold and the air is clear, like from a climate change point of view, Antarctica is one of the most important elements to the world's health, in the sense that with the biogenic silicon that goes into the ocean controls the plankton, which controls a huge amount of the world's oxygen. So I just wonder how much of that thread, like, it was beautifully done in the sense that there was that thread of climate change with the clarity of the air. Was that?
So was it a deliberate metaphor that you were using that for?
Yeah, well, I mean, Antarctica has kind of been spoken about as being the lungs of the planet, and so I think this decision to breathe or not makes sense to set it there. And then also on another level, I was looking specifically last year at Antarctic literature, and for a long time, Antarctica was kind of imagined in literature as being the underside of the earth, and kind of, the land in Antarctica is buried beneath kilometers of ice and nobody has ever physically seen it. And so it's this idea of like, it has been imagined as a land of repressed memories, and that often going down to Antarctica is like a journey down into the self and down into the mind.
Right,
and so I was really interested in that space as being the place where Ollie goes down into her body and sort of comes to terms with these like repressed traumas.
And I felt it was like her rebirthing, which sounds like it it ties in with the climate change as well, because, you know, so much of like you're saying, the lungs of the earth and where a lot of our oxygen is controlled by, is that it's not just a deep under, it's like a you know, like a rebirthing of like a boost of life and energy back into her. So I loved that. I totally got that. and cool to have that perspective as well too, because I mean, you know, it's not an often people are talking about Antarctica in the way that you are. So I think it's awesome that you're marrying the two together. Marrying, not marrying. Marrying the two together. I'm getting nervous talking to you because I liked your book so much. I'm getting flustered.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is your use of Greek mythology. Now, I know that when you were at Oxford, then you'd been studying literature. 500 years ago, I studied literature at uni in the UK. So why did you particularly choose the myth of Medusa?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked this, because I was thinking a lot about not necessarily showing, while I did want to talk about sexual violence, I really wanted to talk about the aftermath of it and what victim shaming looks like. And the story of Medusa really is one of the earliest, or sort of, you know, most like a story of victim shaming that perseveres. And when I finally learned what the actual story of Medusa was, so Medusa was raped by Poseidon, and then Athena, who was with Poseidon, was so mad that instead of punishing Poseidon for having violated Medusa, she punished Medusa and turned this beautiful princess into a monster. Yeah. And I was so interested in how Medusa has been remembered as a monster for kind of how
it's like I have Medusa hair. I have Medusa hair. I haven't said that. So people have said that to me before. Oh God, you've got Medusa hair, right?
No, but
all these curly snakes coming out of your hair, your head.
But she's remembered as being a monster, and not for what happened to her. And I was particularly interested in, I read an essay called Laugh of the Medusa by a French philosopher called Hélène Cixous, and she talked about how we could reimagine Medusa's story so that Medusa, who has this power now where any man that looks at her turns to stone, and so Cixous talked about sort of reversing this myth and making her then have agency, because she has a power to turn any person that tries to objectify her or look at her to stone.
Right.
And so I was interested in kind of the whole of Sea Monsters is about Ollie being turned into a monster by the men that are around her. And she is turned into a Medusa character or Medusa figure.
Yes.
Because something awful happens to her and the person that does it is not punished. She's the one that's punished for it. And they
which sadly is pretty common,
and it happens even before that. You know, I mean, she's like the albatross, isn't she? You know, the women shouldn't be on a boat. You know, that whole boys' club attitude.
Yeah.
We know about the trauma in Ollie's experience, but the book ends on such a hopeful note, which is lovely. But this is kind of another loaded, deeper question is, do you believe that the sum of our life experiences then define us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how cliche this sounds, but I think, you know, we are what we make of those experiences rather than we are what happens to us. In the book, this like recurring motif or recurring question, do we choose to breathe? Came from a philosophy seminar, which I think relates to your question. In that the philosopher that I was listening to speak was talking about how free will and choice don't exist, because we are like the combination of everything that has happened to us, and so us being in this interview and me answering these questions is not me that's deciding it. It's all of these external forces that have been impressed upon me. And I remember coming home thinking, I just can't accept that. Like, I don't want to believe that I have no free will and that I have no choice.
Totally.
And so this book really was trying to make the assertion that we do have agency, and we can rebuild our homes after someone has broken in and set fire to our things. That we can remake ourselves, and that we aren't just the result of all of these external forces.
And that's exactly I think what where we wanted that question to go, because Ollie has had so many dreadful traumatic experiences, but it is her and so she could have never recovered. And that's not to say that everybody is able to make that choice and to learn how to breathe and to or that there's
there's a timeline in which that exists or anything.
But it's also it's that nature of kind of fate, isn't it? Accepting your lot, or standing up and saying no. I don't. As you say, I don't accept that this is going to define who I'm going to be in the future. It's kind of it's, as you say, it is that agency, that choice to breathe.
And I think from interviews that I've listened, a lot of people ask you, well, why, or from what I've read is like why she has that healing by herself, and why she doesn't end up in a guy, and it leaves it hopeful. But to me, the thing that I loved in the book is that it was done by herself. She made that internal choice, whether it was conscious or subconscious. But I think it. I don't really know where I'm going with this, other than that I liked it.
No. I mean, I guess it's for me. It was that she didn't need a man, or she didn't need a partner to make her, to define her, to heal her, or to help her be happy. She kind of found herself. Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I was very resistant to the idea that the right person comes along and therefore she is saved, or she finally learns to be loved because she's shown love by the right person. And I think Hugo is like absolutely fundamentally, it's like a key player in her journey towards finding that and finding herself again. But he isn't the sole reason that happens. That's what the difference was.
Do you think that when she left Hugo, that was the first step to healing? That she found enough confidence in herself to leave and to realize that she needs to take a step forward?
Perhaps not consciously. I think she is struggling or she doesn't have the language with which to express this feeling that she has inside of herself and this trauma that she's carrying. And so I think, I guess it is the first step then, because she realizes that this is something that she needs to figure out, and she has to be alone in a sense to do that, and to sort of learn this language with which to articulate her experiences. I think that is kind of like one of the first steps she does in finding herself again, or rebuilding her home.
Yeah, because he loves her body, he loves her body as it is. And I mean, for me, she then does begin that healing process, because she is able to accept the gift that he gives her, which is that, that her body is beautiful. And I think that she kind of, begins to see it through his eyes in a certain way, that she can begin to think of herself as beautiful again, even though, like, you know,
she might not feel it, but sees elements into it.
But he does give her that gift, I think.
So, absolutely loved your book so much. So thank you very much for writing it. And I think thank you as well for bringing up the topic of climate change and also the topic of this grey area. I think it's brave of you and amazing that you're pushing that boundary. It's really cool.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So what's next? What are you working on? Are you working on something?
Yeah, so
not that you have to, but we'd like you to.
I have a few things in the pipeline. Would ideally like to be adapting this into a film.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I'm working on. A year and a half ago, my friend Charlie and I made a online series called Cloudy River, which is on SBS On Demand now, and we're in the process of turning it into a much larger show.
Yeah.
So working on that, and then next year I'll start my PhD, and I'm going to do the novel as my PhD.
Yeah.
So I have that sort of simmering away at the back of my mind, but yeah, at the moment I'm working on Cloudy River.
Well, we're looking forward to watching that. Yeah. All right, Sophie. Well, thank you so much for coming on our episode. Truly, it
was lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it was an absolute pleasure, and you've been incredibly generous with your time, and we really appreciate it, and thank you.
And I really believe, and I hope that, you know, getting to understand your personal experiences behind the book as well will help our audience and people that are listening as well get a lot more out of the book as well. So
cool.
Thank you so much.
So thank you.
All right. Well, we'll speak to you very soon.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Wow. What a great conversation.
Yeah, I know. It was so special to have her on the episode.
I just feel that there were so many elements, so many layers to Below Deck that I felt it was fantastic to actually have Sophie discuss it with us.
And give her personal perspective on it too.
And give her personal perspective on us. So the format was a bit different this week. Let us know what you think.
We hope you enjoyed it.
We sure do. Okay, so our next book.
That time of the episode?
It's that time of the episode. Okay. So our next book is Dear Edward by Ann Napolitano. And it's your pick.
So the next book we will be reading together is Dear Edward by Ann Napolitano. And it's a story of a boy named Edward and his family, and they are moving home from New York to LA, and unfortunately there is a plane crash and Edward loses all of his family.
Oh, okay.
I know.
That sounds depressing.
No, it's not. Despite what you think, it's actually not. It's very sad what happens, but it is not a depressing book. It will actually leave you probably a bit teary, but also having a good laugh, a good chuckle, and leave you, you know, with themes of wonder and leave you on an uplifting note. So
good.
I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Goodbye. We hope you enjoyed watching this episode.
If you did, please leave us a comment below. We'll see you soon.